You expect betrayals to come like thunder, loud, angry, stormy. But this one came with coffee and a smile. It was supposed to be nothing. Just a quiet meeting with my parents at a worn little coffee shop on the corner of the Old Town Square. The kind of place where the windows fog from the steam and the espresso always tastes faintly of regret. We'd met here so many times before, for birthdays, check-ins, pointless chatter about politics or the new neighbors. I thought it would be the same. Simple, predictable, safe. Instead, it was a funeral for trust. My parents didn't sit down with any big announcement. They didn't brace me, ask how I was, or even try to warm me up with a gentle let-in. My father just sipped his coffee, burned his tongue, muttered about how they always over-roasted the beans, and then, almost casually, he said, "We've decided to give the house to Mark." There it was, that quiet, cold sentence that changed everything, as unceremonious as a shrug. No invitation to respond, no eye contact to soften the blow, just a decision handed to me like a traffic update. My mother nodded as if this was all perfectly normal, like they were telling me the garage needed repainting. I remember sitting back in my chair, hearing the scratch of the sugar packet as I twisted it in my fingers. I didn't speak for a moment because I wasn't sure I'd heard them right, or maybe I had, and my brain just refused to believe that this was how they were telling me. Not in a call, not in a family meeting, not even with a basic acknowledgement of what that house meant to me. Just now, just here. They launched into a list of reasons before I could even breathe. "You live in the city," my mom said gently. "You're settled. You have your own life now. You've always been the independent one," my dad added, nodding like this was all logical, reasonable, painless. "Mark needs the support more than you do," she said. "He's not as strong." And that's when it started. This quiet, rational assassination of everything I had ever done for them. Because that house wasn't just a building. It was where we celebrated Christmas every year, where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I scraped my knees and patched the holes in the drywall. And when it started falling apart, when the roof caved and the heating died, it was me who stepped up. I was the one who paid for the new boiler when Dad was out of work. I paid the property taxes when they couldn't. I paid for the windows, the roof, the siding. I didn't do it because I was expecting something in return. I did it because they were my parents. Because that house felt like home, and I thought preserving it meant preserving us. Turns out, I was just preserving it for someone else. Mark has always been the one who floats, drifting from idea to idea, life raft to life raft. He's been a DJ, a barista, a painter, a podcast host, a life coach, never sticking with anything for more than a few months. He's been fired more times than I can count, and every single time, they were there to comfort him, pick him up, spin the story into something noble. He's just searching. He hasn't found the right thing yet. The world's a tough place for sensitive people, but I wasn't allowed to be sensitive. I was their rock, the dependable one, the kid who did their homework, stayed out of trouble, found a job, paid rent, checked in on holidays, mailed birthday cards, remembered to call on Sundays. I was the background music to Mark's solo performance, and now I was being written out of the final act. They didn't even ask me how I felt. Not once. They didn't ask if I had plans for the house, if I wanted to say, if it mattered to me. They decided. Because that's what they do. They decide what Mark needs, and they assume I'll understand. I didn't even feel angry at first. Not exactly. I felt hollow, like I was watching my life from outside of it, like I was some extra in someone else's family drama. They were speaking in terms of fairness, logic, compassion, but I knew what it really was. It was habit. The habit of giving everything to the one who needs help and taking for granted the one who never asks. They called it love, but it didn't feel like love. It felt like erasure. When I stood up from the table, I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. I just looked at them, their tired faces, their calm expressions, their practiced certainty, and I realized something that hit me like a quiet slap. They had no idea what they had done. In their minds, this wasn't betrayal. It was parenting. That was the part that hurt the most. That they didn't think I'd mind. That I'd be fine. Because I'm always fine, right? I'm the one who figures it out, who lives in the big city, who pays my own bills, who smiles and nods and sends the money when they're behind on the mortgage. But the truth is that I'm not fine. Not because I wanted the house, not even because of the money. I've become in this family. How easily they handed over the one place I invested in without a second thought, because my effort never counted. Only Mark's struggle did. And you know what? Maybe that's the last gift they gave me. The clarity to step away, to stop playing the role they wrote for me and start writing my own. Because I don't want to be the strong one anymore if it means being alone. They gave the house to Mark, and maybe that's fine. Maybe they need to believe he's still worth saving. But I won't be the one holding the ladder next time the roof caves in. After my parents announced their decision to give the house to Mark, everything changed. Quietly. There were no confrontations, no stormy arguments or slammed doors. From the outside, nothing looked different. My mother still called every few days with her usual updates. She asked the same questions about the weather. She texted about upcoming holidays, about Mark's birthday dinner, about who would be bringing dessert to Easter brunch. But I felt it. A shift. Not in them, but in me. Every time I picked up the phone or replied to a message, I could feel myself slipping back into the role I'd spent years perfecting. The peacekeeper. The one who asks nothing, needs nothing, fixes everything. The convenient son. Only now, something inside me was beginning to fracture. The calls became harder to return. I found myself staring at the phone as it rang, letting it go to voicemail, telling myself I'd respond later. Then later became never. I began replying to texts with short phrases, emojis, things that didn't require thought. It wasn't a decision I made. It just happened, like fog rolling in over a familiar landscape, until I could no longer see where I was. I still went through the motions, still sent cards, still showed up when expected, but the feeling was gone. The fragile thread that made me believe we were still a family, that my efforts had meant something. Now it felt like everything I'd poured into them had drained out the moment they chose someone else. Then one evening, back in town for work, my mother invited me to dinner. I said yes out of habit. It wasn't in the house anymore. That place wasn't ours. Not anymore. Mark was living there now, apparently redecorating with his latest girlfriend, someone who taught pottery and wore flowing scarves like statements. No, dinner was in a rented apartment downtown, a modest place with neutral walls and a clean, soulless kitchen. New furniture, new curtains, but the same atmosphere hung in the air. That tight, practiced politeness, that quiet emphasis on appearances, that same undertone. Let's not make this difficult. They were already sitting at the table when I arrived. There was wine, lasagna, a small salad my mom tossed with too much dressing, like she always did. For a moment, it felt almost like something familiar. But then it started. Mark's job, Mark's latest interest in holistic medicine, Mark's desire to maybe go back to school, maybe music production again. He's really turning a corner, Dad said. He just needs some encouragement, support, Mom added. You know how important that is for him. I didn't say anything, not because I agreed, but because I was tired, because I knew how this script went. Every time they talked about Mark, it was with this fragile hope, this tender desperation. He was always on the verge of becoming someone, the phoenix just about to rise, the sun who needed saving. And I was the control group, the one who didn't need reminding, the one who never strayed. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just asked the question that had been building in me since that coffee shop conversation. Do you ever think about me? I mean, really think about me? What I need? What I feel? They looked at me like I'd switched languages. What do you mean? My mom asked. She sounded genuinely confused. Dad tilted his head as if trying to figure out what exactly I was asking. It hit me then. They weren't pretending. They honestly didn't understand. And maybe that hurt even more. I pushed my plate back and stood. "Never mind," I said. "It's fine." Mom stood too, tried to hug me goodbye like always. I let her, but it felt like she was hugging someone who wasn't there anymore, like she was following a script she didn't realize had already ended. When I got back to the hotel, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the TV. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the old cardboard box I'd brought with me from storage. It was labeled in my handwriting, "Nursery stuff, keep." Inside were tiny onesies, soft flannel blankets, a rattle shaped like a bear, and a faded picture book with chew marks on the corner. Things from when I was a baby, things from the house. The only things that had made it out with me. I don't know why I'd held onto them for so long. Maybe some part of me thought one day I'd take them back there, bring my own child into that house and tell stories about growing up, show them the tree where I'd learned to climb, the wall I'd accidentally cracked playing soccer, the attic where I once hid a birthday present for a week. But now that house wasn't mine, not even in memory. It belonged to the Markovs. I leaned against the headboard, the box on my lap, and I felt something give way inside me. Not with a crash, but with a slow, deep exhale, like I'd been holding my breath for years, waiting for my family to notice I was drowning. They never did. And that, I realized, was the true inheritance I had received. The process of change didn't come like a flood. It crept in like fog, soft, gradual, inescapable. After my parents gave the house to Mark, I didn't explode or storm out or cut ties in a blaze of righteous fury. No, I did what I'd always done. I adapted. I minimized. I told myself I was fine. And for a while, I kept going through the motions. I answered calls I didn't want to, replied to texts with polite updates. They never asked how I was really doing. Their questions felt like placeholders. How's work? Still in the city? Uttered out of habit, more than care. They didn't listen for the answers. And I didn't bother to elaborate. Because what would be the point? I became a quiet echo of my former self in those conversations, shrinking a little each time. At first, I thought I was just tired. But over time, I realized I was disappearing. Not just from the family dynamic, but from their concept of who I was. I was a file in the cabinet labeled stable, unchanged, unchanging. And Mark, he was the weather. He demanded attention. He shifted and swayed and reinvented himself every 3 months. He consumed all the emotional oxygen in the room. A few weeks later, my mother invited me to dinner. "It's nothing special," she said. "Just a little family evening." I agreed before I even thought about it. Out of habit, muscle memory, the part of me that still longed desperately for something to feel normal again. When I arrived, I realized they had moved again. Another apartment, another space dressed up to feel like home. New chairs, new lighting, a framed photo of Mark in a suit next to a woman I didn't recognize. "That's his new partner," my mother said proudly, as if Mark was a startup and she was pitching investors. "She's helping him figure things out." They'd gone out of their way to make it look cozy. Soft lighting, background music, something baking in the oven. It felt like a stage set, a simulation of comfort. But the warmth didn't reach me. Dinner passed in that strange, practiced rhythm they'd mastered. My father poured wine. My mother dished out lasagna and praise. Mark's new beginnings were the theme of the evening. His recent attempt at opening a small business, his meditation practice, the podcast he wanted to launch with a friend from high school. He hadn't done any of it yet, of course, but it was all spoken of in the future tense, as if success was inevitable, as if belief itself would carry him there. I sat across the table, nodding at the right moments, chewing food that tasted like cardboard. I tried to find a place for myself in the conversation, but there was none. My job wasn't mentioned. My life in the city didn't come up. They didn't ask if I was seeing anyone, if I was happy, if I was lonely, because I wasn't the story. Mark was, and the more they spoke, the more I felt like furniture in the room, present, but unnoticed. By the time we finished dessert, I felt something shift inside me, not suddenly, but inevitably, like a slow crack running through the foundation of a building that's already leaning. I looked at them, their easy smiles, the reflexive way they defended Mark's whims. the way they kept glancing at me like I should be applauding. And I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do you ever think about me?" I asked quietly. The question didn't make a sound when it landed, but it rang out like a bell. My mother blinked. "What do you mean? Do you ever think about me? What I feel? What I need? Have you ever tried to understand what it's like for me to sit here and listen to you talk about Mark, like he's your only child?" Silence. My father didn't look at me. He picked up his glass and took a long sip, like he was hoping it would erase the moment. My mother's confusion hardened into discomfort. "Why would you say something like that? You're doing well. You've got your life together. We're proud of you." "But you never say it," I replied. "You assume I don't need anything because I don't ask. But that doesn't mean I don't feel things. It doesn't mean I don't hurt." She stared at me, as if I'd just started speaking a language she'd never heard. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said softly. Of course she didn't, because they'd never looked beyond the mask I wore for them. The capable son, the reliable one, the self-sufficient background player. I was the one who drove in on weekends to fix things, the one who didn't need reminding, the one who sent money, kept my emotions tidy, and made things easier. And maybe that's the tragedy of being the strong one. People forget that even rocks crack under enough pressure. I stood to leave. I couldn't stay in that room a second longer. I didn't say goodbye. My mother rose and hugged me automatically, but it felt hollow, like she was hugging the idea of me. The son she remembered, not the one sitting at her table. I walked to the hotel in silence, my breath fogging in the cold night air. The city around me was lit up, couples laughing, people moving in and out of restaurants, life continuing all around me like nothing had happened. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box I'd brought with me from storage, the one with the baby clothes, little socks, a worn stuffed rabbit, a yellowed onesie with my name written inside the collar in my mother's handwriting. The last pieces of a home that no longer existed. It was all I had left, and as I held the soft fabric in my hands, I realized it wasn't just nostalgia I was clinging to. It was proof that I had once belonged. But now I was just a guest in the story of a family I used to call my own. It wasn't dramatic, the way it ended. There were no shouting matches, no grand confessions or sudden transformations, no miracle moments where my parents finally saw what I needed them to see. Just silence, and the slow, steady settling of a truth I could no longer unsee. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel early. I didn't leave a note. I didn't stop by to say goodbye. My parents wouldn't have expected me to, not because they were angry or offended, but because they believed everything was fine, because I had smiled through dinner, because I had hugged my mother back, because I had learned long ago how to make them comfortable, even when I was breaking. As I drove out of the city, past the streets where I used to ride my bike, past the gas station where I'd bought my first candy bar with allowance money, past the tree where we carved our initials as kids, I didn't feel nostalgia anymore. I felt nothing. That was the moment I realized something essential. The house was never mine. Not in the will, not in the family plan, and not in the emotional architecture of my parents' hearts. It had always been Mark's, even before he claimed it, because the house, like everything else, had been shaped around his needs, his failures, his potential. It bent for him. It breathed for him. It waited for him to become someone, and I had simply maintained it. I'd been the scaffolding, the maintenance crew, the storm shield. I thought I was building something we shared. I wasn't. I was just holding it up until he came home. The box of baby things sat in the passenger seat beside me. I didn't know where I was taking it. I didn't know if I'd keep it or leave it behind somewhere. All I knew was this: it was the only piece of that house that had ever truly belonged to me. And maybe that was enough, because I no longer needed their acknowledgement to validate my role. I knew what I had given. I knew how many hours I'd spent patching that roof. I remembered the weekends I drove down without being asked, the bills I paid without hesitation, the phone calls I answered at midnight when they didn't know what else to do. I did it because I thought love meant service. That sacrifice was loyalty. That being the strong one meant being invisible. But I'm done being invisible. They never asked what I wanted. And I'm done waiting to be asked. I moved forward quietly. I changed my number, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I stopped sending updates, stopped responding to "how's the weather" texts. I unsubscribed from the family group chat. I chose peace over politeness, distance over performance. Not a single confrontation, just a door that stopped opening. There's a photograph I keep now, not in a frame, not on display, just tucked in the back of a drawer. It's of the old house before the renovations, before the siding was replaced, before the windows were new, before the roof stopped leaking, the house the way it looked when it needed me. I keep it because it reminds me that I was there, that I mattered, even if no one said so. And slowly I began building a new sense of home. Not a physical space, but a sense of self, a place where I was allowed to feel hurt, to be seen, to matter without having to prove it. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. They heal with clarity. And that's what I was left with. Not bitterness, not revenge, not even sorrow, just clarity. I still think about them sometimes. My parents, Mark, that house. I wonder if they ever looked around and noticed I was missing, or if, in their minds, I was never really supposed to be there in the first place. But I don't wait for that answer anymore. I'm not holding my breath, because I've already learned the truth. Some houses are built with hollow walls. Some families ask you to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. And some people will only love the version of you that doesn't ask for anything back. I used to think I was the one left behind. Now I know I was the one who left.